Stories are the reservoirs of resilience passed from generation to generation. Even though the situation we're in now is new to us or new in some dimensions, actually drawing on those reservoirs of resilience, drawing on the stories we have about how people have survived, how we've survived before, how we've held each other up, picked each other and ourselves back up. I think that's really powerful. All of the practices that are evidence-based coping tools, right? All of the things that sustain us in the moment and longer term are about connection or reconnection. And all of the things that stress us are in some way or another about what drives disconnection. Those are what people need from leaders when we're in these volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous times. Trust, even when the truth is hard to talk about. Compassion and stability. This is a person I can count on to create a sense of stability and grounding, and we can get into some of the micro behaviors that drive that.
Let's say the leader that doesn't know wants to talk about values, but what if someone comes and they're really traumatized? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm LaTonya Wilkins, your host, award-winning executive coach, and author of Leading Below the Surface. And today I am joined by a guest. So if you are an avid Leading Below the Surface listener, you've known I've done a few solo episodes in a row. And I did those solo episodes because I've just recently launched the second edition of Leading Below the Surface. And I really wanted to get the answers to questions out there and help everybody understand what was happening with that and how you can use Leading Below the Surface in your organizations, as that's something that I get asked about quite a bit. And so now I'm really excited to dive back into our guests. And today's guest is equally as good of a friend as is an expert. And I'm really, really excited to have her. We are going to have a very, very candid conversation about mental health. What do I mean about mental health, and why is Caroline the person that I asked? There's a lot of mental health type wellness podcasts. I did one this summer. Go back and listen to that. It's called Summer of Wellness. This is one we're going to get deep and really dig into what we can do to take care of ourselves, what we could do to take care of our others. We're going to give you some tips around that. We are recording this in September of 2025, late September. It's going to be released in early October 2025. There's a lot going on in the US. There's a lot going on around the world. Me and Caroline happen to be based in Chicago. So there's also some stuff going on in our city. And so I'm really excited to have this candid conversation with you. So let me first introduce Caroline, and then Caroline, you could kind of dive in and see if there's anything I missed. So we met last year I think that was last year, right? The IOC conference? I think so.
Yeah, year and a half ago.
Yeah, it was the Institute of Coaching conference in Boston. And that was a great conference. Amy Edmondson and I got to meet her for the first time. Dr. Pamela Larde, I got to meet her for the first time. Among others. I was actually standing in line, and I happened to be in line with Caroline talking to one of her mentors, waiting for Amy. And then I ended up actually going to see Amy at her book table because she was doing a signing. But while I was in line waiting, I met Caroline's mentor, Larry, and he was like, we were talking, and I was telling him about Leading Below the Surface. He was really excited. He's like, oh my gosh, you should meet Caroline, and she was in Chicago. You two should talk. And then we started, we connected on LinkedIn, and then we tried to connect during the conference, and we did it. And so I was actually surprised, but she followed up, and we actually had a happy hour a couple months, like a month later, maybe a few weeks to a month later. And so Caroline is a therapist, also a coach. She also does some speaking. She's just all around really good person. When I talk about below the surface conversations, she's one of the people that I have those with. I actually really look forward to having these conversations. We go in and we get deep, and sometimes they're emotional. Sometimes we express hopelessness. Sometimes we try to get more hopeful. But the thing that I think grounds us is our expertise and like what we do in the world, like how we help other humans. And how we write about these topics and how we live these topics every day. So Caroline, what did I miss?
You covered a lot. I think the piece of credit I really want to give you here is that the reason that we bonded quickly and I've stayed in these conversations, and I hope will for many years to come, is that I think you, more than almost anyone I've met in my life, really embody a lot of the values around this stuff that you preach. And when I get disoriented as a leader and as a human being, I feel like our conversations reground me in curiosity and hope and perspective in a way I really appreciate. So I'm excited for this conversation today. And I also just want to say up front, I'm sure there are going to be things you put out there that you are better positioned to answer than I can.
We could tag team this. How about that? And I do want to just give a shout out to my grandma, Ruthie, because for those of you that have read Leading Below the Surface, I talk about her in my book, and she lived to 93, and she was the one that really installed this, I don't want to say resilience, but that's the word that comes to mind, and hope. My great-great-grandmother was a slave, and so whenever I would get upset about the world or freak out, she would always sit me down and have a conversation with me. And so I really, and we could talk more about that as we move through. Because people ask me about that. They're like, how do you do this? Like, how are you not upset? And I'm like, it's not that I'm irresponsible or I'm in denial. It's just that, again, when me and Caroline were starting, we're talking about grounding principles. And so maybe that's where we start. How are you keeping yourself grounded these days? What advice can we give others? And I'll share as well.
I want to call back something you said a minute ago to dive in here, which is, I love that you brought your grandma into this. Because there's this quote from Esther Perel where she says, stories are the reservoirs of resilience passed from generation to generation. And when I was in the depths of, June 2020, peak pandemic, no childcare, the world is undergoing a kind of stress that we haven't known globally in our life up until that point. I called my grandma, and she told me stories for hours. And it was this really powerful reminder that even though the situation we're in now is new to us or new in some dimensions, even though what we were going through back then was new to us or new in some dimensions, there's nothing new about having forces outside of our control that test us in really big ways, that threaten to tear us apart. Or to shut us down to whatever is life-giving to us. And that actually drawing on those reservoirs of resilience, drawing on the stories we have about how people have survived, how we've survived before, how we've held each other up, picked each other and ourselves back up. I think that's a really powerful starting place.
Sharing stories is definitely a wonderful way, to kind of get us back. And like what you said, history repeats itself. And again, folks, I'm not trying to minimize anything that's going on, but my grandma would always say, freedom isn't free. And I think people think it is, because we've just lived. I mean, I know for me, I'm not living nearly, again, my life isn't perfect. There's a lot of isms in the world that affect me especially, but my life compared to my ancestors is pretty much a breeze, right? And I think it could be easy to get used to that, and that's what my grandma would say is freedom isn't free. And then she would remind me. And so for all of you that don't have grandmothers or grandparents or, there's, I think, and Caroline, I'd love to hear from you, but I think surrounding myself with friends of multiple age groups, friends that are different from me. I have friends that, a good friend of mine, white guy, he's 62 years old. I was with him last night, all the way up to a white woman, 70 years old. And then my grandma, and then my aunts, and then other friends that are other races and cultures, that immigrants that, I learned from. And so I think that's a really good way to maintain perspective. I think the other way to maintain perspective, again, reminding ourselves that this is history. And then again, and this is something I'm going to be talking a lot about in our second book, is reconnecting with ourselves and others for real. And this is released before this event, but October 14th in Chicago, I'm having a Meet the Authors event, and I'm bringing together a group of women authors so we could talk about our books and how these books can help people in these times. And it's not for us to promote our books. It's really for inspiration and connection, and everything just feels so heavy and broken. And I just wanted to do something to bring diverse women and people together. Diverse women on the panel, but diverse people together in the same space so we could have some real conversations. I do meditation, I do journaling. There's so many things that I do, but I will tell you energy work, but I will tell you the things that really get me through are what Caroline just said, is just really connecting. I went to Responsive Conference last week, and it was just seeing other humans also really be questioning the way we work and take care of each other is really important. Anything you would add to that, Caroline?
Yeah, I think exactly the point you're making, that on a big picture level, right? If we zoom out to really what it means to care for ourselves and care for one another, come back to connection, connecting to ourselves through our values, connecting to other people through investment in relationships, and being really strategic about who we're surrounding ourselves with and how we're showing up for them. Connection to the world around us, to nature, but all of the things, all of the practices that are evidence-based coping tools, right? All of the things that sustain us in the moment and longer term are about connection or reconnection. And all of the things that stress us are in some way or another about what drives disconnection. Disconnection from our values, disconnection from one another, disconnection from our humanity, from our curiosity, from all of the things that are life-giving and sustain us, right? So we can talk about specific practices, but I think that's the kind of lighthouse I keep coming back to is this a step toward connection, or is this a step towards disconnection for me?
Can you say more about that? Like, the things that stress us out or the things that disconnect us? Like, what are those things?
Fundamentally, they're kind of 4 buckets of things that drive our stress response. One is actual or perceived threat. That could be a threat to my livelihood. That could be a threat to my safety. That could be a threat to my identity or sense of belonging. But perceived threat, unpredictability. So not knowing what's coming, which is one of the reasons so many of us are feeling this chronic, prolonged stress in an environment that feels increasingly unpredictable. Related to that, novelty. If we haven't been here before, we don't really have a roadmap for it. And then a lack of control, or a perceived lack of control, right? And so all of those things drive stress, I think, in part because they disconnect us in different ways. So just as an example, I'm going to nerd out on the brain for a second here, okay?
No, this is great. Folks, I hope you have a pen and paper out because these are some gems.
So when we feel threatened, one of the things that happens is, because our emotion system has really evolved primarily to respond to acute threats, and to prevent us from getting in situations that threaten our survival, we disproportionately attend to the things that feel threatening, meaning they grab our attention in a way that is totally disproportionate to the size of them relative to other things in our lives. And we learn more rapidly and are prone to overgeneralizing that learning in the face of threat. And so that actually disconnects us from a lot of other things, because it's incredibly resource intensive for our brains to be focused on perceived threat. In the same way, when we're navigating a situation we haven't been in before, when things feel out of our control, unpredictable, it's incredibly resource intensive for our brains. And that means all the resources directed towards just dealing with that novelty, that unpredictability, that perceived threat are pulled from other things, right? So our quality of attention towards one another goes down. Our capacity to notice other things, like what's going well, what we're grateful for, how we feel in our bodies, what we need, what others need from us, all of that goes down because our attention system gets hijacked by that chronic stress. That's the sort of animal brain, like bottom up process that happens. And if we go into a default mode, then we'll just default over and over to following our fears and that scarcity mindset, right? There's plenty to grab onto. There's plenty of content to grab onto. But if we want to be connected with one another and with ourselves as human beings, we have to really intentionally push back against that through what are called top-down processes, which is deciding with intention, where do I want to put my attention and energy? To whom do I want to give myself? To what do I want to give? The resources I have, the energy that I have, and really investing there, especially in one another, right? Which is the quickest way to fill our cups. Is to take really good care of one another.
So is this like fight or flight kind of thing where you're just kind of stuck in panic all the time, and so you can't really get rational? Is that kind of like, what's the relationship between what you're saying and that effect?
It's absolutely related. So when you go into that fight or flight mode, your amygdala, that's part of your brain that signals threat, sets off this whole cascade of cognitive and physiological processes. And when you're in that mode, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that makes decisions, anticipates outcomes, thinks creatively, and a lot of other really important executive functions, it gets dampened temporarily, right? And so we become less able to access the parts of ourselves that are creative and intentional and able to do the kind of divergent thinking that we need to solve the problems of today in this complex world when we're in that threat state. And so if we want to be able to show up as leaders, as individuals, as parents, as whatever for the current challenges, we have to be super intentional about doing things that pull us out of that threat state, out of that scarcity mindset, out of that fight or flight mode.
If you are a leader in the world right now, what should you be doing with your team? Should we just not say anything, or should we say something?
So I really actually think you are the perfect person to speak to this. There are two things that I have really learned to think intentionally about from you that I want to call out here so that we can maybe talk about it from that lens. One is, you had mentioned to me recently really thinking about the needs of followers, right? And if you connect those needs of followers from the Gallup research, right, of trust and compassion and stability and hope, right? Those are what people need from leaders. But all of those are even more true when we're in these volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous times. Right. And so, yes, to the behaviors that you named, but they are examples of things that establish trust. This is a person who's trustworthy. This is a person who speaks the truth, even when the truth is hard to talk about. Right. Compassion. This is a person who cares what I'm going through, who sees what I'm going through, who acknowledges what we're all going through in different ways right now. Stability. This is a person I can count on to create a sense of stability and grounding. And we can get into some of the micro behaviors that drive that. And hope, which actually turns out to be the most important one of all. We can come back and dive in deeper here, but just one thing I want to say is that hope, I think some of the most interesting work on hope is the stuff that Brené Brown's been doing, where it's not a feeling that people have. It's a really active process that combines having a goal, a pathway, and agency.
Hey folks, I'm going to interrupt us, take a really quick break to tell you about 4 ways that we could support you individually or your organization this fall. First off, we could do coaching, whether it's one-on-one, short sprint, CEO coaching, or something for groups or teams. Speaking, you could book me for one of my impactful keynotes. I'm actually going to be releasing the 2nd edition of Leading Below the Surface, so check out my new keynotes. Workshops, you can choose from pre-built workshops, or we could do a custom workshop, and then facilitation and listening. We have listening labs, offsites, listening sessions, all of these things to help you build a roadmap to build trust. So if one of these feels right, let's talk. You could head over to changecoaches.io and reach out to info@changecoaches.io to get a conversation started.
So when I think about what it means to be a leader right now and what leaders need to be doing, that's one of the things that I come back to is, okay, are you setting clear goals that matter to people? A pathway for how to reach those goals together, and then empowering people and setting them up for success in such a way that you can at least have hope at an organizational level or a team level, whatever that may be. So that is one thing that I've learned from you that I would love to talk a little bit about, is how you think about leaders meeting the needs of followers right now. The other piece that I think you have with the leading below the surface work that you've done, and it's connected to this, but it's just remembering that all organizations are human systems.
Yes, right.
I'd love to hear from you about that piece. How does it shift when you think instead of, we're a company or a group or an organization that does this thing, instead you think we're a group of human beings. We can do better together than we can on our own if X, Y, and Z conditions are met, right? So I would love to hear from you about some of what you think those conditions are.
I think, and I love the future of work is human. It's below the surface, and I think that's really important to call out in the AI era. Like when I use AI every day, and I know you do too. Like you've used it for certain things, but I think we have to. I almost see this shift of like being a visionary. Like we're gonna have to reassure people that their humanness is needed in the workplace and what that is, and talk about that. Because a lot of stuff that we listen to, it's like, hurry up, you better understand this, otherwise your job's gonna, it's like fear tactics. But I think it's also up to leaders to be to let people know, hey, what parts of your job make you human? What parts of the job could you use AI for, and what parts do we want you not using it for? And maybe not using it for conversations, but maybe using it for things like emails, like things that are transactional. The only other thing I'd add, so like I love, like again, hope, having that, but I think if you work at an organization that has established organizational values, I would just pull those out. And if there's any values, like, for example, inclusion may be a value, or innovation may be a value, or teamwork is a value, initiative, it could be there's all these different values that people have. Supporting one another, that's been a value. Caring, I'm seeing that come up more. And so if you could tie it to a value, I once worked for a leader when I was in my last role, when I was on the leadership team of an organization. And he would always just tie everything back to values. Like when people would say, hey, are you going to say something about this world event or whatever? Sometimes he didn't, and sometimes he did, but it just depended on our values. So I would just say, in addition to the hope piece and knowing what your followers need, think a little bit about your values and reconsider how you might need to express those a little bit differently.
And I also think I would add showing up with curiosity and humility, that if we haven't been here before, we probably don't have the answer yet, right? And it can actually break down trust to pretend that we do, but we can show a really strong commitment to working together to get it right on behalf of our values, right? And that's where our values can be this really powerful orienting force in the absence of really clear solutions.
Yeah, because it's like you need some sort of guardrails, right? Because it could just go, like, I get it. It's uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to do that either. Like with my team, I wouldn't, like, you have to have some sort of guardrails because things could just go off, and like, one-on-ones are good. Like, I think those are better. And I think that takes us into the next topic because, again, I think a lot of people want to see a stance or an email. But I think, folks, I'm not saying we don't need that, or I'm not saying that's not satisfying. But it's also just think about the leader and like just how much stuff can be scrutinized, and like actually the human connection's better. Like, because you just don't know. Like if you're sending out an email for a team and it's just generic, like everybody might not resonate with that, but they will resonate with a conversation. So it might be even like, hey, there's a lot going on. Here's our values. Hey, in our one-on-ones, let's talk a little bit about how we can support each other. Like something like that, right?
I think what you're pointing to is that having clear values and processes that support authentic human connection matters a lot more than always having the right words at the right time or the answer on stuff that you as a human being may still be figuring out or sorting through. We all have our leadership lessons that we learn over and over. And I think mine has been sleep on it, right? Because it's easy when you are supposed to have expertise in something to feel like that means you're also supposed to always have the answer. And a lot of leaders don't have the answer, especially for new situations, right? Or nuanced, complex challenges people are feeling very black and white about, but are not, in fact, black and white issues. And so I think being able to really, again, check in with ourselves as leaders and say, what do I need? What have I learned I need to do to take a step back, to care for myself and to care for my team, so that whether or not people agree with where we go next, they absolutely know that we cared for them in the process.
I know you're a therapist, and so I would probably want you to answer this question. I know you like to put a lot back at me, but I think, coaching, we're not therapists, right? And I'm not a trained therapist. And so when therapy starts to seep in my work, I have to draw the line, right? And I make a referral. And so let's talk a little bit about, let's say the leader that doesn't know wants to talk about values, but what if someone comes and they're really traumatized? Are there therapy tools that we can use, especially when we don't know?
Are you talking about tools that folks can use on their own outside of the context of therapy?
Yeah. Like that are inspired by therapy. Like, is there anything like therapeutic techniques people can use with their teams?
Yeah, I mean, there are evidence-based strategies for regulating ourselves and for helping to regulate other folks in relationships. I tend to think of this as different strategies for different points and the emotion wave. So here's what I mean by that. With difficult emotions, you can think of them as coming and going in a wave, maybe many, many times over. But if you think about your baseline, whatever that is for any given individual, we have very different baselines, but you're at kind of a 0 to 3 maybe on the emotions that get in the way of being effective, right? No good or bad emotions, but definitely ones that motivate behaviors that can be impairing for a lot of people. And so at our baseline, that's when we want to be thinking about strategies that actually help to maintain baseline. So I love Guy Winch has this TED talk where he talks about this concept of emotional hygiene. What are the non-negotiable things that you need to do every single day, just like you shower and brush your teeth, and you don't kind of relitigate that every day, you just do it. What are the non-negotiables for your mental health? Right. And they're different for different people. Generally, there are a number of things like the ways we take care of our bodies and get enough rest and have social connection that's meaningful that matter for everybody. And then there are other things like, going for a run or getting outside or connecting with nature, or doing something creative that have a bigger impact for some people than others. And then you have this kind of next phase of the emotion wave, which is where we tend to think the most about using coping tools therapeutically, which is you're maybe like a 3 or 4 to a 6 or 7 out of 10, right? You can feel your stress. You're getting a little less patient. You're getting a little more disconnected from yourself, a little more disconnected from other people maybe, but you're still in control. You still got it managed. High achieving people can absolutely function through the zone and do every day. But if you notice yourself there, if you notice you're a little shorter, a little more disconnected, a little more frazzled, those are times that we want to really reorient, reconnect. There are basic tools like slowing down our breathing and doing diaphragmatic breathing, like getting outside and moving our bodies outside, connecting with people who are trusted resources for us, etc. Listening, learning something new that can help us kind of come back to baseline. Then there's strategies when you're in the flood zone, right? So you're in 8 to 10, you're not going to be productive. You can't think clearly. Definitely don't make any big decisions in this zone. And when you're there, your whole job is to figure out how to get through it without making a new problem. When people confuse emotions with decisions in the flood zone, they create crises. When people who are emotionally flooded confuse emotions with decisions, they create crises. Right? This is why they never quit your job on a bad day.
Yeah, don't quit your job in a bad. Yeah. Yeah, or don't talk to people when you're mad.
There are strategies on the other side of that are evidence-based for recovering from that stress response. And we always do come down on the other side of a really tough emotion. But a stressor passing is not the same thing as stress leaving our bodies. We actually have to process that physiologically to return to baseline. And so, yeah, there are a bunch of evidence-based practices that people can do day to day. Some of them we can kind of create defaults in the workplace. So, for example, there's a really high stress, intense time. Can you do a walk and talk meeting? Because if you can mobilize, if you can get outside, if you can move your bodies together, probably your stress levels are going to come down. Can you open your team meetings with a check-in or a mundane poll that makes people laugh and feel like they know each other a little bit better, right? If you know someone's grandma is sick or they're going through something hard at home or their kid's starting a new school or whatever, can you just send little text messages and check in with those team members, right? All these little practices that let people know, yeah, we're here to work together, but you're a human being in this system and I care about you.
Yeah, I love that because these are like little things, right? And it's like, it almost sounds like what you're talking about too is like rituals, like having your own leadership rituals, like with your team. And again, when we were talking about grounding, just having your own systems and structures where, when these things happen, like, it's like sending a birthday card or, like what you're going to do in those situations. And it's like, it's funny because, and I'm sure because you speak as well, I coach, I think I do a lot more probably business, like leadership type coaching, but yeah, I get leaders all the time that are like, oh my gosh, if I say something, that what if, I don't know, I'm not a therapist. So like, what if you probably are fine? It's like, sometimes you just need trying to provide resources. How can I support you during this time? I mean, your employees aren't expecting you to be your therapist, right? So I don't know why people get so freaked out about that.
There's these studies that I always sort of crack up reading the conclusions that, we've looked at all these different ways that you can read people, what they're really thinking, what they're really feeling, what they really need. And over and over and over, they come to the conclusion that, get this, ask them, right? So I think just being able to, again, have the humility to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't need to have all the answers. I need to have a quality of showing up for what I value and of actually valuing in practice what I say I value. And if I do that, it builds trust, it builds connection. And then I can just ask people, how are you doing? I know you got a lot on your plate right now. As you said, just validate. Right? You have the worst day ever. Even if you tell a really close friend, even if that friend's a therapist, you're probably not looking for a bunch of advice, right? You probably want to say something like, that sounds really hard. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do to help?
I know we have about just 10 minutes left and I want to just get to one more topic. I'm sure there's a lot of folks here that already have therapists or other mental health professionals that they work with. I know I do therapy. I do energy work. I've had coaches off and on. I don't have a coach right now because I had one over the summer. When do people need therapy?
There's a sort of clinical answer to this question, which is when folks are struggling in a way that stress response or a deep sadness or depression or difficulty adjusting to life changes or coping with the stressors, when the way that we're responding to that is keeping us really stuck or getting in the way of showing up for what matters to us. And it's not a bad day and it's not just a bad week, but it's really interfering, right? In every single diagnosis in the DSM, which is our diagnostic manual, there's this criteria around this is causing clinically significant interference in day-to-day functioning, right? So anyone who meets that threshold, I would say it could benefit and probably should be in therapy. I think there's a whole other group of folks who maybe are functioning or even sometimes over-functioning through day-to-day life, but they're feeling either stuck or disconnected from what matters to them, right? And so they may be delivering for other people, but they feel inside like they're languishing or not enough, or like if one day they couldn't deliver, their whole identity would fall apart, things like that. And I think those folks often benefit from therapy, even if it's not an acute day-to-day functioning situation, because it's incredibly helpful to have someone who can listen to you non-judgmentally and with curiosity, see the patterns that are keeping you stuck, understand what really matters to you, understand what stories you learned along the way that may no longer be serving you, and then reflect that back to you in a way that you can actually consciously choose where you want to put your time, energy, beliefs moving forward.
So I think what I'm hearing is like, if you're not having just a bad day or someone's not just having a bad day, but if it's like something sustained over time.
And is part of it, but also how interfering it is. Someone may have a more acute crisis, right? Their marriage falls apart, or someone they love gets very sick or passes, or something like that, where they cannot hold themselves up through this moment and they need someone else to help create a space that is just nurturing and safe and affirming, and where they can put it all out on the table without any fear of judgment and have a process for digging out of that hole systematically and being witnessed as a full human being through that grief, suffering, etc. I think in that case, yes, like it may be 2 days in that you need to see somebody. There are other folks who can function at this kind of, they're getting through level for a long time and it doesn't look as acute, but they're stuck and they know that they need help getting unstuck from the patterns that aren't serving them.
Yeah. And so folks, I want to have a disclaimer before we close, but I think these are just high level ideas. The reason why I asked this question is because if things are coming up for your employees and you're noticing changes, that might be like, hey, is everything okay? Is there anything I can help with? And then sometimes employees will reveal like really tough things. And again, you don't have to solve it for them, but yeah, you can help them. You don't even have to like stay in that conversation. What you can do is just offer to help them. Like, how can I support you? Like, do you need to flex your hours? Do you need to, like, how can I do that? How can I make sure you get through this? Like, what can I help? Like, it's like when someone is diagnosed with a disease or something unexpectedly, like you're not solving that for them, but you're creating a space for them to be able to go to their doctor's appointments. And this happens a lot. And so that they can manage their schedule and their lives.
And so those workplace accommodations, and I think the other piece of it is making sure that people know they're not carrying it alone in the times that feel heaviest in their lives, right? And you don't have to carry that for them, but to be able to say, I don't want you to carry this alone.
I love that. I don't want you to, that's a really good one. I don't want you to carry this alone.
Mentor Larry, who we actually full circle started talking about today, the reason we met, he was my mentor on internship and postdoc, and in supervision, he used to say that to me all the time. You can worry, but never worry alone. Nobody worries alone here. Stuck with me to this day, and it's a commitment and a value that I have as a leader too. Okay, we can worry, we can stress, but we don't do it alone.
Yeah, and I love that because it's like a lot of times, like, you know, I've had a couple people share with me some things that have happened to them recently, and because they kind of disappear, letting them know they're not. I love that, like they're not alone, and you don't want because, like, you know, a lot of people don't want to share that stuff because they don't want to put a burden on you. So if you respond that way, then you're actually opening up a pathway for connection. So folks, we covered a lot of ground here today. And I think what we probably want to end with, and I'll go with Caroline's closing comments here in a minute, but like, we don't know everything and we're not expected to. We're not therapists. And there's probably some tools that you have already in your toolbox that could help your employees do this, like values, like Gallup's needs of followers, like telling people they're not alone and you don't want them to go through this, like, you know, having your own personal structures and systems. And even I would encourage everybody, if you were taking notes or if you weren't taking notes for on the go, after this, just jot down like three to four grounding practices that you have or that you might want to try or just keep doing over the next year or so, because it's going to continue to be stressful for at least the foreseeable future. I mean, we're in uncertain times, and I just don't see that ending right away. Caroline, what would you add?
There's an exercise that you just called to mind for me that I have done both with a lot of parents over the years and with a lot of leaders, where I have folks think about a time in their lives they were going through something really difficult, and to think about who they really trusted to support them through that time. And then I have them reflect on what it was about that other person and how they showed up that made them know I can trust them with this, right? I can come to them with this. I can trust them. They can help me with this. And I have done this in multiple countries in all different kinds of settings, and over and over and over. It's the same list of 10 or 15 things. They were non-judgmental. They were there for me. They really listened. They were in my corner, and so on and so forth. All the things that we would probably identify also. And so I just, you mentioned people already have a lot of these tools. And I guess that's what I would remind people to close out here is that you know what people need largely because you are also a person, because you have been on the other side of requiring support and clarity and stability and that co-regulation process, other people to help regulate you, and you know what it took in terms of how those other people showed up. And if you can just ground yourself in those things as a leader right now, you will probably be 90% of the way there in terms of being the human-centered leader that folks know.
So Caroline, how can people find you?
My website, chicagopsychotherapy.com. I run a practice in Chicago, and I also do a lot of coaching and public speaking work. So.
I know you weren't going to mention this, but you have a children's book coming out.
This is a concept that I have been talking about clinically for over a decade that is really just how we teach kids about their brains and how to grow the kinds of things they're trying to grow in their brains with intention, and how much community care matters in the process, how we show up for each other. And so this is a children's book that's really about that. And I'm writing it with a very close colleague of mine who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, Choya Roberson-Moore. So we've given ourselves a deadline of submitting in the next 2 weeks. So.
Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you folks for listening. If you know anyone that could benefit from this podcast today, please pass it on to them. This is such an important topic right now. And if it's something that you enjoyed and that you found yourself taking notes on or listening or rewinding as we went through, someone else will feel the same way. So thank you. All right. Thanks, folks. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I'd love to connect with you. So follow me on LinkedIn at LaTonya Wilkins. And if something resonated, send me a note at info@changecoaches.io. I read these messages regularly. Thank you, and see you next time.